Hey, welcome to 7.6 Part 2. So, we're going to start now with some problems where when we square things, it's not quite as nice and neat as it was on the other side. When I look at C, it is ready to be squared right away because I don't see anything added, subtracted, or multiplied by my radical. So I would right away square both sides. Again, when you square it, the square root totally cancels out, but that's just 8x plus 1. But on this side, here's where it gets a little annoying. We hopefully have talked about this a little bit in this class so far this year, but when I have x plus 2 squared like that, you actually have to write it out twice and FOIL it. I can't distribute the power of 2 or anything. So when I go through and FOIL this, firsts, outers, inners, lasts. Alright, so I end up with x squared plus 4x plus 4 when I multiply that all out. And the reason I'm saying this is annoying is I now have a quadratic equation, and a quadratic equation takes more effort to solve. So the reason it's quadratic is because I've got an x squared. And now I'm recording this over the summer, and I am hoping that I will remember and that we should have practiced solving some of these quadratic equations in class. So when you're looking at this right now, hopefully you have seen this recently. But if I'm going to solve a quadratic equation, my first step is to get everything on one side and have it set equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract the 8x over, and I'm going to subtract the 1 over. Again, I want it to set equal to 0. 4x subtract 8x is negative 4x. And then 4 subtract 1 is 3. And then all of the ones that we're going to be doing in this class can be solved using the factoring method. So what I would do is I would factor this, and this is the part that I hope we have practiced, but I will factor this, so I'm looking for two things that multiply to be a positive 3, but add to be negative 4. The only way I can make that happen is with negative 3 and negative 1. So, and here's what I'm thinking. Negative 3 times negative 1 is positive 3. Negative 3 plus negative 1 is negative 4. Alright. Now, what the factor method does is I factor it. Then my next step is each one of these parentheses I set equal to 0. The reason we can do that is because of something called the zero product property that you learned in GO2. But anyways, I'm going to go through and solve. And then these are really almost the only problems your book are going to give you where you actually do need to make sure you check it, because once I have this quadratic equation thing, you can end up having an extraneous solution very often. And extraneous means it's a solution that doesn't work. So these are the types of problems that you're going to be having to check when you do your homework assignment. I'm going back, hopefully you can see this at the top of your page. I'm going to go through and I'm going to plug in my x to both sides. And then I'm going to go through and solve it. Just make sure this works. 8 times 3 is 24 plus 1 is 25. Okay, yep, that one's good. Check the other side. This time I'm plugging in a 1 for both of the x's. 8 times 1 is 8 plus 1 is 9, so I got the square root of 9 equal to 3. Okay, yep, so actually this situation, neither of them ended up being extraneous. There's just two answers. Let's look at part D. Alright, so part D, very similar to part C. So again, it's ready to just square root, or not square root, but square right away. When I square it, this just becomes 2x, but over here, I have to write it out twice and then FOIL it. So in my mind, I'm thinking firsts, outers, inners, lasts. Okay, so I get x squared minus 8x plus 16. And then again, I notice I have a x squared. So immediately I'm thinking, okay, quadratic equation, that means I got to solve it. So quadratic equation, move everything to one side, set it equal to 0. And then we're going to use the factoring method. And again, they will be nice to you. All of them will be factorable for this section. Alright, so now I'm looking for two things that multiply to be 16, but add to be negative 10. Okay, it looks like it's going to be negative 2 and 8. So here I go, x minus 2 x minus 8. And then I'm going to solve them. So again, set each equal to 0 and solve it. So I end up with x equals 2 and x equals 8. And then again, this is a situation where you have to check it because you're going to end up with some that don't work when you end up with a quadratic equation. So I'm plugging these in to the original. Both places where I see an x, I plug in a 2 for this first one. Alright, so here's what happens. 2 minus 4 is negative 2, and now here's where it becomes extraneous. Because 2 is clearly not equal to negative 2. I know it's the same number, but it's not the same sign, so it's not considered the same. So that is an extraneous solution. That's what it looks like when it's extraneous. Now, when you're doing this on your assignment, find it, but label it extraneous for us. So that's not actually one of the technical answers, but I want to see the fact that you did find it originally. Alright, so then now let's look at x equals 8, because it does happen sometimes where neither of them end up being correct answers. That doesn't happen too often, but we should check it just in case. So I'm going through, plugging in 8 everywhere I see an x. 2 times 8 is 16. Okay, that one's fine. So x equals 8 is our answer. Alright, moving right along. The last type of problem you're going to see in section 7.6 is when you have a radical on both sides of the equal sign. And actually, you know what? I guess I should say they're not always going to be on both sides of the equal sign. You want to make it that way. So, have one radical on each side. Have one radical on each side. And then we are going to square or cube as needed. And one special note. Put a box around this, star, star. When I do something like this, squared, notice that when I square something, I do the base times itself. So it actually ends up being 3 times 3 is 9. X square root of x times square root of x is the square root of x squared, which is just x. But the key part is that see how the 3 gets squared as well? And it's different because see how this one does not have a plus or minus sign? So before, with a plus or minus sign, you have to write it out twice and FOIL it. Now, it's a multiply sign, so you can actually distribute the exponent. We'll say more about that as we go along. Alright, let's go for example 3 then. So part A, I already have one radical on both sides, so right away I can actually just square it. And sometimes these end up being relatively easy problems because what happens is the radical is canceled, so now I just have a nice simple equation back from Algebra 1 that I can just solve. So you're going to get the same answer no matter which side you choose to put everything on. I'm choosing to get all my x's on the right side, so I subtracted x from both sides. Now I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides, so negative 3 subtract 7 is negative 10, and then keep going. So I end up with negative 10/3 as my answer. And now this is the other type of problem where you will have to check them, especially if you end up with a negative answer. And you can stop as soon as you figure out that this won't work, because the thing is, when I try to plug this in right now, I get negative 10/3 subtract 3. And you know what? No matter what I have over here, this ends up being negative 19/3. I can't have a square root under a negative. That's imaginary. I can't have a square root of a negative. That's imaginary. So this one actually has no solution. No real solution. It has an imaginary solution, but no real solution for our answer. Alright, so example B is the first one where I want to show you that it hasn't given us everything all nicely on one side. So the first thing I can do is actually add this entire radical over on the other side of this equation. Once I'm to that stage, then I can square both sides. So I end up with 2x equals 3x minus 1, and I'm going to go ahead and solve it. So I end up with negative x equals negative 1, and I can't have a negative in front of my x, so divide by negative 1, and x equals 1. Quickly check it. Again, everywhere I see an x, I'm plugging in a 1. So I end up with the square root of 2 subtract 3 minus 1. Oh, you know what? I get the square root of 2 subtract the square root of 2, which is 0 and 0. So it works. X equals 1 is our answer. All right, part C. Part C, I already have it set up, so I've got one thing on both sides, so I get to just square right away. On the left, that's easy. It just turns into 3x plus 2. On the right, remember what I said earlier. I actually want to think about writing it out twice, and so 2 times 2 is 4. Square root of x times square root of x is the square root of x squared. Square root of x squared is x. So I end up with 4x on that side, and then I go through and solve it. And I end up with x equals 2. So you know what? Let's check quick and see how that works. So sometimes those can actually end up being rather easy problems. Really depends on what we're given. All right, so I've got 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is the square root of 8. And this might not seem similar to you, but if you plug it into your calculator, it does work. Otherwise, we are all experts by this point at doing upside down division. So actually, if I simplify square root of 8, it actually ends up being 2 squared root of 2. So we're good to go. That works as a solution. At this time, I would like you to pause the video and try part D, please. Okay, the final answer should be 2. So if you got that correct, you can be done with this video. Yay! If you didn't get that done, watch really quick. So first I'm getting my radicals on each side, so I end up with the square root of 12 minus 2x equals to the square root of, oh, you know what? I wrote that incorrectly. It should be a 2 in front of the square root of x. There we go. And now I want to square both sides. So I've got 12 minus 2x equals, and then this is the same thing we had actually in part C, so I know already that's going to be 4x. I'm going to solve it by getting all of my x's on one side. Divide by 6, and x equals 2. And then you could go through and check it, make sure it works, and it does this time. So we're done. Thank you for watching 7.6 Part 2, and good luck with everything.